Video games have been around a long time, from the inception in 1958 when a physicist created a simple tennis video game to demonstrate physics, to the first widely adopted video game in the classic Pong, to the titans that video games have now become in the modern age, such as World of Warcraft, Halo, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Fortnite, and so many more games, worth a collective $347 billion globally. But all of those games I just mentioned, and likely all of your favourite video games ever, are dwarfed by mobile games. Games like Fate Grand Order, Candy Crush, Clash of Clans, Genshin Impact, and more collectively make up 71% of the entire revenue of the global gaming industry. But how did we get here? This video will be a comprehensive look at the evolution of video game monetization, from the very first paid DLC to loot boxes to battle passes, gacha games, and more. Let's jump in. From the earliest days of gaming, there was but one way to make money from it. You sell your game, people buy it, and they play it. It was a simpler time with none of the live service, constant updates, and content drops of the modern era. And while it would be easy to just say that buying a game and playing it through completely before trading it in is the only fair way to do things, I think a lot of people do miss the fact that a lot of good has also come from this evolution in technology and monetization practices. That said, I think we all do miss the days when you could just buy a game and know that you are getting everything possible out of that game and don't have to worry about paying for more content or power or cosmetics down the line. This is definitely the most fair and upfront way of handling video game monetization, and this is how it was done for a long time, but perhaps not quite as long as you'd think. The first big innovation in how games handled monetization came in the form of expansion packs, later known as DLC. If I asked you right now what the first ever DLC for a game was, you'd likely respond with Oblivion's Horse Armor, as it's widely cited as the starting point for how DLC and microtransactions would evolve in the coming years. But while it was a big step, it was not the first step, as before the actual downloadable part of DLC came into play, many video games featured expansion packs, which came as physical items you would use in your console or PC to add new content to an existing game. The most famous example of these kinds of expansion packs was World of Warcraft, or early MMORPGs in general, such as Guild Wars. These would come in boxes with a disc and add new content on top of what was originally available in the base game, such as new areas, new classes, all that kind of stuff. The only part they were missing at this point was becoming downloadable and using the internet. DLCs and expansion packs nowadays are mostly seen as fair game by players. After all, there are much bigger boogeymen to hate on that we'll get into later. That said, at the time they were being introduced, they weren't so widely accepted, with the aforementioned Oblivion $2 horse armor receiving a sizable amount of backlash. Granted, this specific case is closer to modern video game skins than an actual DLC pack that offers new zones or content, but still, there was opposition to this method of monetization at the time, despite it now being widely accepted and even preferred compared to other options. When done well, DLC expansion packs are basically buying another mini game for cheaper than the base version, which if you enjoyed that, you'll probably enjoy the DLC. So in my personal view, I'm absolutely okay with this practice when it's done right and adds plenty of new content and experiences to the game that wouldn't have been there otherwise. Of course, as with all of the methods we'll talk about in this video, DLC can be done poorly just as often as it's done well, where barely any new content or experiences are added for the price of many full games, or content is held back from full releases just to be sold later as a $20 DLC. But in comparison to much of what comes later, DLC is overall pretty fair and a good way to monetize your games for a longer period of time while adding new things for existing players to enjoy in the game. For a long time, this was how video games were done, but with the advent of the internet becoming a larger part of everyone's life in the 2000s and 2010s, many large video game companies were cooking up something spicy, and this moment, if any, was what changed video games forever. Much like Oblivion's horse armor for DLCs, Overwatch is likely the first game to pop into your mind when I ask what was the first loot box in a video game ever. But again, that would not be true, as the basic concept of loot boxes in video games have been around since 2004, with of course Japan being the first country to implement these. The Gachapon ticket was an item in the Japanese version of MapleStory specifically that could be bought for 100 yen, a little under $1, and gave randomized rewards when used. This was the earliest commercial implementation of what we now know as the modern loot box in video games, but it wouldn't be until the 2010s when they truly started to take over. The first majorly successful implementation of loot box box mechanics was by, you guessed it, EA, in a little known video game franchise you might not have heard of called FIFA. Well, technically now EA Sports FC, as they lost the rights to use the FIFA name from the actual organisation of FIFA. Back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, FIFA was beginning to implement these loot box style mechanics, especially within the Ultimate Team mode, and it was wildly successful. If anything, that's an understatement. To this day, the FIFA, now EA Sports FC, franchise makes 4 times the amount of money from player packs alone that they make on actual game sales. At $60 per sale, that means that, on average, players spend $240 on player packs for a game they already paid $60 for. Of course, that's a generalization, and the actual reality is more like the majority of players spending only a little on these mechanics or none at all, while a small subset of whales spend hundreds or even thousands every year on this franchise, just to have to do it all again the next year when it gets wiped and the next FIFA game comes out. It's kind of crazy what a far cry this is from less than a decade earlier, when gamers confidently stated that $2.50 is far too much for a single skin in Oblivion. With the major success of FIFA and games like it implementing these loot box mechanics, many large studios wanted a piece of the pie and implemented similar systems into their games, such as Call of Duty, Overwatch, and Star Wars Battlefront, to name most of the popular ones. And of course, they saw very similar revenue growth to FIFA, and even more companies jumped on the bandwagon. The whole thing sort of came to a head in 2017 with the aforementioned Battlefront 2, where gamers collectively had had enough of these practices. The game went viral for all the wrong reasons, with players from thousands of other games ripping on EA and players essentially doing a soft boycott of the game. Gaming is just 2 letters away from gambling, and with Battlefront's luck-based monetization system, we have the 2 letters we need. This game, and many like it, were condemned for essentially being gambling with a video game attached, and it even went as far as the EU and some other countries actively working on laws to prohibit these kinds of predatory practices in video games, especially those intended for an audience under 18. After all, why should you let your 12-year-old son roll a loot box 25 times for one skin or player he wants and spend hundreds in the process when you obviously wouldn't let him go down to the casino and give him $200 to throw at the roulette wheel? These kinds of laws are still actively being worked on as I make this video in 2023, but the EU, and specifically Belgium, have been at the forefront of implementing these laws quickly before any more damage is done to the psyche of young gamers, and any more parents' credit cards be sent way into the red by their kids buying FIFA packs for a 1% chance at the good player they actually want so they can actually get some wins. Loot boxes were really a turning point in the direction of video game monetization, where gamers collectively stood up and said fuck you to all the developers using these tactics. And as we move on, I will say it made a difference. Did it fix everything and we all pranced off into the sunset and video games were saved from the evil demon of greedy companies? No. Life is more like Game of Thrones and less like The Little Mermaid, but it certainly was an industry-shaking event that did make a difference. In the wake of the loot box fiasco, video game companies were looking for a new way to monetize a game long after its initial release without drawing the ire and bad PR that was now associated with loot boxes and other similar systems. Fortnite was not the first Battle Pass style system ever introduced into a video game. Dota 2 gained that honor a decade back in 2013, but there is a reason that every future Battle Pass is called that. With the introduction of Fortnite Season 2 in 2017, the first Fortnite Battle Pass was created, and it completely revolutionized the genre. Fortnite is, by all metrics, an inconceivably successful game. You won't find it among Minecraft, GTA 5 and Tetris at the top of the charts for sales, because this game has made zero money from game sales. It's completely free to play, yet has generated over $26 billion in revenue as of 2023. The way it does that is through battle passes and exclusive limited time skins. Limited time skins, events and content is something that has always existed and doesn't really fall neatly into this timeline of events from direct purchase to paid DLC to loot boxes to battle passes and more. But it's well known in the industry that if you take something away after a certain period of time, people are far more likely to buy it immediately and more likely to buy it in general. Battle passes do this by essentially retiring the content that was in the past once the next one comes out, which not only incentivizes people to play the game and grind out the XP or stars or battle points that you need, but also to buy the passes in the first place. A lot of these passes also come with an option to purchase levels directly for the in-game currency, which in itself is a way to enhance towards the predatory mechanics of taking things away from people after a limited time. It's been shown time and time again that we as humans feel losses more than we feel gains. We hate losing more than we love winning. And that feeling of losing out on a cool skin or piece of content has been used to sell us things since way before video games even existed. That said, I do think battle passes are a lot more fair than loot boxes, when themselves often employed a similar system where a certain box would only be available for a limited time and after that you couldn't get its contents anymore. But loot boxes are far more predatory in my opinion, as they are so much closer to just direct gambling for what you want. At least with a paid battle pass, it's made clear to you when and how to get the content you want from the pass. It's all there, you can see it, and you know what you're getting in for when you buy the pass. Of course, as is somewhat of a theme with this video, battle passes can be done poorly by needing copious amounts of grinding to get to the end, thus incentivizing people to pay for levels or face missing out on that cool skin that was the whole reason they bought the pass in the first place. But I think when done right, battle passes are actually a reasonable compromise and are pretty fair to the player for the most part. They still have that limited time element to get you to fork over cash now before you have the chance to regret it, but they are overall far better than loot boxes and far better than the latest evolution in game monetization, Gacha Gaming. If you're like me, you might have only heard a little bit about Gacha Gaming. I personally am a PC gamer at heart and only have a small handful of mobile games in my arsenal. But the rise of Gacha Gaming has been pretty meteoric in the last few years. This practice essentially boils down to having an infinite number of things that the player can buy and making sure there's always something just a little better or a little cooler to spend more on. If there isn't, the player has done everything and has no more reason to spend money. So these games will constantly add new content that's just ever so slightly better or cooler than what came before to keep players spending. These kind of games rely mostly on whales who want the absolute best 5-star heroes or the absolute rarest and coolest customizations or want to collect every possible hero of a certain type or hell, just every hero in general. This might not sound too dissimilar from regular games that constantly add new content and stuff for players to achieve, but the difference maker here is that the players don't really have to achieve anything in games like this other than navigating to the store page. In these gacha games, everything, and I mean everything, can be bought with real money. Oh, your loot box roll only gave you a 4-star epic champion? Better keep rolling to get more copies so you can make it a 5-star epic champion. Oh, that loot box roll only gave you a +3 legendary weapon? Better roll again so you can get it to +5. These games are basically the final form of what happens when you allow companies to do whatever they want in the pursuit of profit. They employ every trick in the book to keep you playing, and by proxy, keep you spending. Which brings us back to that statistic from the beginning of the video. Mobile gaming, much of which is these gacha games, accounts for 71% of the global video gaming industry by market revenue. You are in the minority if you don't play these games and spend your money on them. Well, at least in the eyes of profit for these companies. And that's basically where we stand today in terms of video game monetization. There's still a healthy mix of direct buy games that never ask for anything more from you, games with paid DLC, loot box games, battle pass games, and gacha games, but the trend is definitely more towards these deceptive and gambling focused practices to milk gamers for every dollar they have. If you're looking for a more optimistic take though, the pushback on loot boxes in 2017 really did make a difference, and we see a lot less of that kind of stuff in major video games nowadays. Plus, there will always be studios that choose to not use these practices, and we should support those studios as much as we can. They bring us amazing games like Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, and more. Keep standing up for your rights as a gamer and make your voice heard. We fought back against loot boxes, and the EU is actively working on laws prohibiting them. Keep up the fight, and we'll make the video game industry better together. Catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.